It doesn't strike me as the state of affairs being a particularly harmonious relationship between the Scottish Government and the FCDO when it comes to promoting Scotland internationally. You've given two examples which I think greatly trouble this committee in terms of how this...
Sorry, troubles you, Chair. No. You won't speak on behalf of the committee.
We'll give you your opportunity, Douglas.
Just so long as that's minuted.
Give you your opportunity a minute, Douglas.
8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. Rocket away.
Douglas Ross.
Thank you, Chair, and good afternoon, Mr Whiteman and Mr Robertson. Mr Robertson, clearly international governments will be interested in the Government of Scotland. It's currently run by the SNP, who's going through a very interesting leadership battle at the moment. Yesterday, your party president and chief executive said the party was in a tremendous mess. Today, Nicola Sturgeon said the SNP is not in a mess. Who do you agree with?
Okay, right. All right.
Well, sorry, Chair.
To discuss Scotland, promoting Scotland internationally, the internal arrangements of the Scottish National Party are not relevant to that. So could you please ask a question related?
I will rephrase my question. You will have to advise ambassadors and others from international countries the political situation in Scotland. When you are doing that, would you agree with Nicola Sturgeon, who says the current governing party of Scotland is not in a mess, or with your chief executive of the SNP, who said it's in a tremendous mess?
Just good to take that note. You will have to advise foreign governments. So I've not spoken to any foreign governments.
Who do you agree with, though?
I think the Scottish National Party is going through a leadership contest where different people have different things to say, although there's plenty that could be said about that, but I'm not sure what that has to do with the United Kingdom government's promotion.
Right. It's got absolutely nothing to do with promoting Scotland internationally. We've had an answer. Now, could we please move on to... We've precious little time with the Cabinet Secretary. We're trying to find out what the views about Scotland being promoted internationally. Can we please stick to that?
I prefaced my question twice, and I think it's a relevant question, but the Cabinet Secretary is unwilling to answer, and I think people will reach their own conclusions about your chairing of that part of this session. Mr Robertson, you're commonly referred to in the Scottish media as Air Miles. You're commonly referred to in the Scottish media as Air Miles Angus. Do you think at the moment the amount of international travel that you do and the cost to the Scottish taxpayer is seen as a priority when there are many other issues that the government should be focusing on and putting very valuable taxpayers' money towards?
So I see the promotion of Scotland internationally as a matter that creates jobs, that creates investment, that supports and promotes tourism and culture. And I and my office decline more invitations to attend international events than I actually do. Do I think that the travel that I and other Scottish Government ministers undertake in pursuit of the promotion of all of those advantageous elements that a government is actually supposed to deliver on is a good thing? I think we provide good value for that, and there are a great many more things that I could visit and places that I could go that I've yet been to. But my job description is Cabinet Secretary for External Affairs, and the clue's in the name, so my job is there to promote Scotland internationally, and that's exactly what I'm going to do.
That's what your job description says. My question was actually, what do you think of the perception of your constituents in Edinburgh Central, mine in the Highlands and Islands, about that being the focus and taxpayers' money going in that at the moment, when there are critical issues that your government is seeking to deal with, in the challenge in the NHS, in education, etc.?
I'm sure if they didn't want me to do that, they wouldn't have elected me in an essence. They
didn't elect you as...
May I finish the question, Convener?
Not if we're going to mislead, because he was not elected in that position.
How this works is you ask a question, we get...
You don't let the questions be asked.
If you're not happy with the answer, you can ask your question again.
I will,
please.
Thank you. Well, if I can move on, you mentioned Minister Offord's comments about your meeting with the Icelandic Prime Minister. Did you or did you not speak about independence with the
She asked me about independence.
So you spoke about independence?
The Prime Minister of Iceland asked me about independence.
So you spoke about independence?
I answered her questions, yeah.
So therefore, Minister Offord was correct in what he said about the discussions that you had with international counterparts and governments on Scottish independence, because you said You never put independence on the agenda, but that doesn't mean you never speak about independence at these meetings.
I'm very polite and I answer people's questions, Mr. Ross, as I'm trying to do to you.
So I'm just checking, when you said to this committee that you never put independence on the agenda, that doesn't mean that you never speak about independence in these meetings.
If people are keen to ask me questions, I'm always happy to answer, Mr. Ross.
Well, it would be interesting if you would answer about the current political state of Scotland, but we're not allowed to ask about that. So you can confirm that you did speak about independence with the Icelandic Prime Minister in the October meeting of the Arctic Council. Circle.
I refer to the answer he gave a moment ago.
Yes or no?
I did say yes.
Yes.
I was asked a question and I answered it.
And then in
which, as I've already mentioned, would be subject of a report by the UK ambassador to Iceland that was in the meeting with me.
I was just going to come on to that because I noted down in response to the chair, you said that the ambassador or any other diplomat has never raised concerns about you speaking about independence in these meetings. But would you agree with me that diplomats would never do that? They tend to sit very poker-faced, as Mr Whiteman is doing throughout this session, and would never interject in that way. It may come out in a readout of that meeting following. They would never... Could you imagine a diplomat ever interjecting between two politicians in that way?
I don't think that's how it would work. If there was ever an issue that needed to be raised, I would never presume that a British diplomat would not choose a diplomatic way in making their views known on the subject. But never had.
Can I ask on the British diplomats? Do you always refer to them as British diplomats, British ambassadors? Do you ever use colloquialisms when you're referring to them in these meetings?
What colloquialisms would those be?
Would you ever call them anything other than the British diplomat, the representatives of the British or the UK government? Have you ever used any phrase other than that?
What would those be, Mr. Ross?
Asking you, have you ever used anything other than that?
I'm not aware of what phrase you have in mind, Mr. Ross.
Well, the phrase I'm asking you, do you always 100% refer to them as British ambassadors, British diplomats, or have you ever called them anything else?
I can recall a very good interaction I had with the French Europe Minister with two colleagues from the British Embassy where I was lauding and praising their abilities as British diplomats working in the British Embassy to be able to help support British ministers of the British Government whilst at the same time doing so for ministers of the Scottish Government and work to different ministerial directions. I think it was very clear then, I think, and pretty clear in every other interaction that I have.
You'd never call them the English diplomats?
No, I don't think so.
Never?
I don't think so.
Just checking for this committee that you wouldn't mislead the committee deliberately. You've never called them the English diplomats?
But British diplomats, like British civil servants, are British diplomats or British civil servants.
You've never called them in these meetings the English diplomats?
I don't see why I would say that.
It's yes or no to that question.
I have no recollection of ever saying such a thing, no.
You've never said it?
Right, can we please move on? I know he's answered about three times.
He's not actually. Have you ever used misleading statistics when you've been representing the Scottish Government abroad?
I think what Mr Ross is referring to are statistics that were used both by the United Kingdom Government and the Scottish Government in relation to renewable energy potential. Which
ever used them when you knew they were wrong?
So I have been extremely careful that when I have become completely aware that statistics are out of date, they've been updated, they're no longer the best statistics to use, that those are statistics that I don't use, and I should use the current statistics on things.
Just on a timeline, your department were told on the 6th of September about a statistic, the 25% potential renewables from Europe. This is about this. No, Chair, I cannot believe you're going to stop a politician. I cannot believe you're going to do this, Chair. This is incredible. If you're going to do what I think you're going to do, I wonder if you are following your duties as an impartial chair of this House.
What I'm trying to do is try to conduct an inquiry into promoting Scotland
let me ask the
internationally.
question.
That question bears absolutely no relation. Unless you get some point of conclusion about it.
Well, I will.
We're here with the Cabinet Secretary
right.
today.
So the conclusion is that on the 4th of October, you spoke to governments across Europe about a statistic you had been told on the 6th of September should not be used. Your department then went back to say the Cabinet Secretary, we have a specific ask to include that figure in a statement. They were told minutes later that we don't have the evidence to back up that statement, therefore we advise against using it, but you used it at subsequent meetings. Why was that?
So, Convener, you'll be aware
Chair.
that this is...
It is Scottish
this
Parliament.
is...
I'm happy to be called anything. There's a
Oh,
whole.
well, note for that.
What I want to do is try to ensure that everybody else gets an opportunity to ask questions about promoting Scotland internationally.
to get some
If you
answers.
can answer that question as
So it's-
briefly and concisely as possible, then we could move on to the inquiry.
This
at
matter
hand.
has already been subject of a parliamentary statement in the Scottish Parliament and a significant number of written questions, and I'm happy to answer MSPs in the Scottish Parliament. I'm here to give evidence today in relation to the promotion of Scotland by the United Kingdom Government.
The question-
That is why I'm here to give evidence, Mr Convener.
But the question, Mr Robertson, because I still have the floor at the moment, the question is the statistics you use when you're representing the Scottish Government abroad and Scotland's place internationally. And I think, finally, Chair, then, if you're going to try and bring this to a close, I think it's really important that we know about that timeline. Did you knowingly use a statistic when discussing this with foreign governments that you had been told was wrong, could not be proved, and had been asked not to include? Yes or no?
So, Convener, I refer to my previous answer, which is this has been subject to a parliamentary statement.
He didn't get
and
answers
a
there,
large
so we're not
and,
getting answers.
and has absolutely nothing to do with the
got
United Kingdom's promotion of Scotland internationally.
Order.
Everything
And we've
to do
also
with-
had an engaged and prolonged discussion about this with another Scottish Government minister when he was here. So can we now please move on to promoting Scottish internationally? If you finish, we've got 3 colleagues, we've only got half an hour with the Cabinet Secretary. Can we move on?
Well, I still have time compared to what you got at the start. I think it is really important, though. You said you've given statements to the Scottish Parliament and answered questions about this. You'll also be aware that the press have said almost exclusively that you refuse to answer.
Philippa
Why are you
Whitford.
refusing to answer to this committee as
Order.
well?
We've been through this. We've
Chair, I
dealt
think
with
we'll
it.
have to have a
We've had
discussion
it.
about
Yes, we
your
will have to have a
chairing of this-
discussion about
this
it.
meeting as well.
Philippa Whitford, thank you.
Sorry, just on a point of order then, before we move to Philippa Whitford, can we ask that it to be noted that for the first time the Chair has prevented members asking witnesses relevant questions to the inquiry and from getting answers? And I think this is something we'll have to write to the witness about to get the answers in writing.
Thank you, and we will indeed. Can we now move on to discussing the rest of the session on promoting Scotland internationally, which I'm sure Philippa Whitford will now do. Philippa.
Douglas Ross MP. That's not one for the collection. Douglas Ross.